because today, I would like to start with Namaste, because today we are discussing on gestures, and Namaste is one of the most widely known gestures. Actually, in my class with my students, we already had a conversation between which one is correct, Namaskar or Namaste. And I'm just telling like how these both are used and more or less mean the same thing. Without going in a depth between how the new meanings are invented, mostly in the yoga community in the West, and how this Namaste is used in India from the spiritual context to secular context. The gesture, I'm only interested in the hand gesture of how our gestures are always primary to our conversation. Shaking a hand, for example, a gesture of bending our eyes or kneeling, or when I went to Japan, my friends told me that every store you go to, you do not necessarily need to, bend your head much, because, like people here are very polite and express that way. But then when they, of course, bend once, greet like that, and then I would like to bend, and then the more you bend, the more they bend back. I didn't know about it. I feel like I don't mean to go on a competition with bending. Many years ago, His Holiness Dalai Lama came to San Diego, and my students were eager to listen to his talk. And when they came back, I asked them, what did they like the most? You know what my students said? I was not dismayed, but it's just funny to note that, oh, I love the way he moved his head. Oh, I love the way he smiles. I love his jokes. Actually, I was looking for maybe more deep content, but no. Our human-to-human relationship is primary to our conversation. And our human-to-human relationship is not necessarily built by our language, but through our gestures. And when many years back, when I went to learn in a Kala Chakra ceremony with Dalai Lama, he taught me this particular gesture. If I was physically there, I would have made everybody learn this gesture. This is called Mount Meru Mudra, Mount Meru gesture. In Tantra, some gestures are really complicated, but most gestures are universal, like, protection type gestures, or giving, the gesture of giving, or sometimes we can even have just a physical expressions, somatic expressions, meaning something like, oh, he looks so sad, he looks angry. Some of the gestures express our emotions. So what I'm interested today is to see if we can revisit the philosophy of language. The goal is much bigger, and I'm going to bore you to death because I'm going to talk on philosophy. But my intention is to see if the dichotomy we have given from like a structural understanding, Ferdinand de Saussure, or all the way even Jacques Derrida, what we have is, when we think of language, we have the sign reference dichotomy very well established. And then I'm trying to bring to your attention some of the texts like Mahartha Manjari, Yogini Hridaya. These are tantric texts. They discuss extensively on gestural language. And then I'm going to read one particular keyword called sanketa, suggestion, which is used for gestures, physical gestures. But sanketa can be also used for like when you see the clouds and you infer like rain, and that is also sanketa. And sanketa can be physical symptoms, for when some particular symptoms are expressed, then you infer particular disease. So sanketa is a very wide category, and these mudras address broadly the sanketa, and I'm trying to go beyond contemporary meaning theory. And in this context, I will relate to some of the contemporary theories in the West on phenomenology and embodiment, maybe some of the concepts I may have derived from Merleau-Ponty, And so I want to read part of my paper, and I didn't write it. So that part you have to forgive me. I didn't write something new. Many of the conversations are extracted from two papers I have published in the last year. Can representation be transformative? Resemblance, suggestion, and metaphor in Tantric meditation, published in Philosophy East and West, and Language of Gestures, Mudra, Mirror, and Meaning in Shakta Philosophy, in the journal Religions. So what I would like to say is gestural representation is not a second order presentation of something out there, not a shadow truth lurking yet never totally given to us, nor a replica of something else. It is a representation or presentation again. In the context of Tantric visualization, it's a presentation again and again of the particular image, concept, emotion, feeling, or state of the lack thereof. This presentation again is also presentation of fresh. And this is where the concept of prati in the recognition philosophy of pratyavijna resonates. Whether forming instincts or reflexes or acquiring learned behavior, repeated presentation of memories is crucial. In episodic memories, what is being recalled is not just a second order presentation of an absent object. The experiences given are fresh and unique, even when they are simply shadows from past experiences. Similar to the pain of remembered painful experiences, arousal at replaying pleasure, or salivation when thinking of sour fruit, or even when conjuring something remote, these experiences are nevertheless lived and are as authentic as what they stand for. Tantric gestural representations, I argue, have the transformative power to alter the horizon of our experience and leave behind potent somatic imprints. This innate experience of non-dual tantras directly exposes the being as such and the luminous nature of purely latent consciousness prior to a subject-object conditioned structure. Tantras aim to merge the experience world and experiencing subject in a non-dual state. Descriptions fail to express this state even when they describe it as a state beyond representation. Inactive modes of expression, gesture, or ritual participation closely capture a breach of the dichotomy inherent in the discourse of representation. Tantric visualizations presuppose a reversal from the signed reference paradigm to the most basic experience by means of repeating basic experiences and retrieving from common sense experience, both inside and outside. Not all representations mirror direct experience. When a gap exists between experience and its representation, we encounter a propositional attitude. Then the meditation manuals describe X standing for Y, and cognitive devices function in this stand for relationship. What is directly given to us in this context becomes the most distant copy of what is represented. The visualized image stands for complex images that in turn stand for different concepts, and they all stand for some elementary modes of experience. And this chain can be extended as long as the subject visualizing the imagery establishes their intentionality. Representations then become private, as what an image elicits at a given time is determined by the type of experience that the subject is able to evoke. All images, all conceptualizations collapse at the end. When the intended meaning is conveyed, only the experience remains in its pristine form. Gestures are central to tantric practice. Many of the tantric gestures, such as deciphering fear and protection, giving, or threatening, are derived from universal experience. Both rituals and gestures enact meaning or corporeally act out meaning, wherein the whole body and not just the mind represents while also representing. Noteworthy here is gestures in themselves are meanings. For instance, when they express shock or horror. But tantric rituals also provide narratives where sign-reference relation is explicit and the gestures used have predetermined intentionality. Tantric rituals form a dialogue, whether between the deity and the practitioner, between teacher and student, or between two practitioners. Semantic representation in these accounts only functions in the most external layer of cultivating experience. What they aspire for is the unity experience that is corporeally felt and enacted by means of gestures. When the rituals animate, the dichotomy of external layers and inner core collapses. Tantric texts exploit this unity experience to describe intersubjective relation in various forms. The meaning derived in the initial stage of practice, grounded on sign-reference dichotomy, collapses in the experiential modes of merging, called samavesha. Rituals are the domains within which all the representations and simulations come to the surface. It's in the process of rituals that mantras and gestures or mudrās find their meaning, find their applications. If we expunge the active dynamic domain of ritual from the sphere of tantras, the issue of mantric efficacy and gestural meaning become a moot point. Starting with commonly agreed upon symbol of representation, such as using substances with white, red, and dark colors to represent the three gunas, or displaying common gestures such as the display of the index finger, Tarjani mudra, for power or dominance, rituals develop into the zones of abstraction. However, every ritual is unique in its application, based on the variation of the deity being worshipped or the anticipated result. Even the same mandala or the same image of the deity will have a different affective role, guided by the intentionality of the subject performing the ritual. Representation in rituals thus negotiates fluid meanings and context. In order to represent complex meanings, tantras create a hierarchy of images, blending the imagery from different domains or subsuming one image by another. Ritual worship and visualization both creates new imagery and deciphers them. The type of representation we are dealing with here is therefore unique, as complex private and public intentions are simultaneously at play. Tantric gestures are not merely corporeal modes in the field of projection. They are emanations of the deities being invoked. They are the embodiment of the divinities while also being signs. The gestures we encounter in tantras are both private and public. And even among the private gestures, they are both corporeal or external and mental or internal. Gestures such as Shambhavi mudra, referring to the meditation with closed eyes, and Bhairavi mudra, referring to the meditation with open eyes, are not performed by merely closing and opening the eyes. They demand active transcendence and immanence, and a mere physical display fails to become these gestures. Tantric gestures, in this light, are not always intersubjective while still remaining meaningful. If we are to import the insights that we glean when reading gestures and apply them to a general theory of meaning, the paradigm becomes fluid, having a determined structure of language relevant only to some particular application. The fact of the matter is, corporeal gestures evolved prior to expressed speech, and most animals use some gestures. Rather than thinking gestures in terms of common language, we need to think about common language in terms of gestural expression. That is, gestures are a precondition for our expressed speech. Taking one step further, tantras recognize that just like language is an extension of gestures, speech is an extended body. Accordingly, gestures are not some semantic devices imposed for the generation of meaning. Similar to speech acts, gestures along these lines instantaneously accomplish the task without relying on representation. We can get a cue for this from command language, as there is no additional act required in commanding than saying, I command you. Essentially, gestures are transformative devices that portray meaning by presenting the subject's inner modes of being, allowing him to trace the original experience before its fragmentation into the poles of subject and object and as sign and reference. Tantric gestures are doubly constructed. Not only do they retain the early evolutionary traits of somatic response, they also integrate meticulous conceptual representation. And so we cannot address these gestures in any either or paradigm. Every single ritual incorporates some gestures. In the case of tantric rituals, whether Hindu or Buddhist, the rituals developed require gestural performance that initiates a dialogue between the deity and the worshipper. There are specific gestures for welcoming the deity to the ceremony called Avahana Mudra, for offering her a seat called Asana Mudra, for offering pleasing objects like flowers, and for bidding farewell to the deity. Along with these simple gestures, tantras provide some complex gestures, mudras, that the practitioner performs, such as yoni mudra or meru mudra, that are integral to specific rituals and are performed during the course of enacting rituals. These gestures not only make the rituals an actual performance, they also mediate between the natural and the spiritual. Or following the reading of Nair, mudras connect the subjective and objective worlds of performance through movements. It's in this enactment that the gestures mediate the subjects to give an exposure of the absolute, or they become the mirror image of the experiencing of the absolute. Gestures, however, are not merely the portrayal of meaning, but rather they do actively constitute reality, with gestures expressing creativity embedded within self-consciousness. This is to say that gestures convey beyond what Merlin Donald has attributed to them. Gestures convey human attempts to reconfigure reality and not just represent it. If we read tantric rituals in light of their intended magical effect, it is all the more vivid that the objective of gestures is not to represent, but to create a new reality. Setting aside magical rituals, even the visualization and internal rituals, antaryaga, are intended to transform the mental landscape of the performing subject, eventually to transform his personal experience. Whether the gesture is performed mentally or corporeally, the argument remains that gesture is inscribed in the body when we consider the body as an extension of the mind. In this light, there is no categorical difference between a purely cognitive understanding of Ācārya Mudra or its corporeal expression in the Hatha Yoga manuals. When we read tantric gestures in light of mimesis, we come to the realization that it is by means of gestures that imaginative enactment of an event occurs. A mime then allows us to relive experience from the past, traversing episodes previously lived. Or the mime becomes an avatar for a game of counterfactuals played now and projected into the future. This means that the mime requires acting out of a sequence of events that may happen or may have already happened. In addition to what the example of mimes reveals, gestures can express emotional attitudes, simple propositional states, or complex ideas where semantic and emotional aspects are infused. One should not think then that tantric gestures are only a set of gestures that do not address complex nuances. There is actually no clear demarcation between secular mimes, gestures from dance, and rituals and tantric gestures. While Tantras introduce a new set of gestures, they nonetheless utilize existing gestures from the cultures of their origins. Tantric deities display the gesture of threat or protection, giving, to give a few examples from everyday life. But we need to explore deeper, not just to discover some new meaning or complex process of enactment, but also to raise the question of what does even mean? The more we engage Tantric texts in deciphering and contextualizing gestures, the more we come to realize that not only are their meaning systems different, but that they are using the very concept of meaning differently. Most importantly, what is meant by meaning here is a transformation of experience and not a representation of images. Tantric texts engage in the process of deciphering meaning, but that of gestures, mantras, or mandalas as mechanisms to trace consciousness back to its primordial nature, self-effulgent and non-directional, while at the same time filled with infinite potential. Therefore, reading Tantric gestures is not about discovering features of a universal grammar. On the contrary, it is about how Tantric rituals evade a universal appeal to representation and strive to relive reality or reconstruct the given reality. To begin with, Tantric rituals simulate theatrical performance in many regards, whether the audience is the deity alone in private rituals or where public spectators are involved. In the second case, the priest is either playing a lead role or is mediating between the deity and the audience, creating a dialogical sphere among three parties: the deities, the priests, and the audience. The privacy of gestures in this context rests merely on their non-vocality. At the end, the dialogue by means of gesture becomes a powerful tool to animate ritual, giving lifeblood to what is otherwise a mere fantasy and transforming the experience of the participants. Gestural monologues thus become a dialogue and a trialogue when the ritual space phenomenologically transforms into sacred space, enabling participants to cultivate and transform experience. For this, we need to acknowledge that gestures are a form of language, even when they lack syntax and have no propositions to represent. Displaying gestures in the Tantric context is not just about a dialogue with the deity, but rather a process through which the abstract becomes concrete and the non-differentiated consciousness assumes deity forms. Moreover, when participants copy the gestures the deities display, they are also mimicking and, in a sense, becoming the deity. And in this plane, transformed by means of gestural expression, the priest mediates between the deity and the audience. Just as in a drama, a character is recognized for the role he plays, the priest is identified with the deity as the ritual drama unfolds. The gestures, however, do not merely display what lies within the belly of the abstract meaning. They also allow subjects to return to the same primordial state. Mudrās, in this sense, function in the same role as that given to mantras. Displaying gestures, a process of creating meaning or being creatively engaged in the process of generating meaning, transforms otherwise random acts into a seamless series of actions. Central to theatrics are that gestures initiate a dialogue among the audience, the characters, and the actors. It is by employing gestures that the narrative becomes alive and the actor transforms into the character. This is where bhava, in the theatrical sense of emotions as well as their expression, becomes contextual. Moreover, the corporeal symptoms such as tears or trembling become part of bhava, like sattvica bhava, making the minds central to a gestural discourse. It is in the kinesthetic gestures that the body becomes a visible language. Central to Bharata's analysis of theatrics is rasa, an exotic emotional surge that embodies judgmental and appraised cognitive states. When we include emotional expression within the scope of meaning, displaying gestures becomes integral to both the revelation of the intimate modes of consciousness as well as refined modes of emotional expression. The difference between drama and ritual expression is, whereas the actor remains emotionally indifferent when expressing different emotions, ritual agents embody and transcend the displayed emotion by using a transcendental gaze to subsume violent or agitating emotions under a positive, blissful, and enlightened state of the mind. These gestures, therefore, do not just share some propositional state, but reveal the very being of the experience. One fundamental difference between theatrics and tantric ritual is the second is mostly performed privately, lacking the audience to evaluate or to savor rasa. Another significant difference is the ritual agent is not using gestures to merely communicate, but rather to transform external experiences into sublime ones. Rather than affirming his somaticity by means of expressing the self through gesture, the ritual agent is reversing the course of actions to encounter his foundational being, his original desire. The ritualized gesture is not merely a display of the body, as the flesh and blood in this account becomes transformed into a phonic body, with the aspirant installing nyasa, phonemes, and mantras in his body. The lived body of the aspirant during the ritual is thus enmeshed with speech. The body has thus been transformed into a mantric structure and is felt as both a recipient of gaze and the agent of gestures. Gestures are meaningful only when their significance is comprehended in the context of the rituals in which they occur and are deciphered as the prescribed text relate. For mudrās do not have independent meaning to be universally derived. There is nothing to inherently establish these gestures as expressing what is assigned, be it the gesture of hypnosis like a sarva sammohini mudra, or sky roaming, the khechari mudra, or the gesture of immobilization like sarva stambini mudra. What is anticipated in this context is beyond a social convention, a tantric convention that is shared only among the initiates. Gestures are internal to rituals and are an expression of the potency of action, since corporeality represents the potency of actions. Generally speaking, performative rituals rely on a dichotomy between the worshipper and the worshipped. Ritual acts are grounded on differentiation, where the agent actively engages with objects and uses them accordingly. This understanding is reversed in the non-dual tantric paradigm, where the ritual act becomes an expression of the fusion of agencies. It is in the act of ritual that the deity being worshipped melds with the subject worshipping her. While the image of a warrior, the horse he is riding, and his sword combine to show a perfect warrior, it is not a recognition of difference, but a seamless unity or harmony that makes a perfect warrior. Likewise, the articulation of mantras, displaying gestures, and the act of visualization are what bring the ritual acts to life. Gestures, in this sense, are the devices that bridge existing polarities. Maheshwarananda's statement in the Mahartha Manjari underscores the seamless harmony in displaying gestures. In quote, the state in which the establishment of the glory, characterized as the surge of higher and higher grounds corresponding to the splendor itself, or the expression which, in other terms, is the flash of having the recognition as such of the bliss of the Supreme Lord, the luminous being who is characterized as the mingling of both the modes, svabhava, of being worshipped and being a worshipper, as he is of the essence of the freedom in various forms of sporting or being victorious, resting on his nature is directly experienced or apprehended without any doubt. That very state is recognized as Karankini, or known in other schools as a Sangshobhini gesture. From the above depiction, not only do gestures mirror inner mental states, they also stimulate intended state when being displayed. It's in performing the specific gestures that Maheshwarananda assigns the direct experience of the surge of bliss to the resting of the self in its primordial nature. These gestures are there to gradually cultivate the refined modes of consciousness, and as a consequence, the aspirant is thought to be able to experience oneness with the deity that he is worshipping. When we read the above passage in light of the gestures that he elaborates upon, we also notice a successive progression towards the absolute, moving the mind from the external forms, corporeality, categories, or speech to the inner modes of bliss and awareness. At the end, we need to engage tantric categories to understand tantric language, gestures being its subset. In tantras, the category indication, sanketa, captures both natural and non-natural signs. Whether it is a must stop red traffic light or the gathering of clouds indicating rain, the term sanketa captures them all. There is no categorical difference when it comes to sanketa, whether it is the physical symptom of sneezing for flu or tears for sorrow. Our common language is a subset of the entire paradigm of representation, where corporeal modes, any form of signs, gestures, and speech, whether in terms of meaningful words or speech for or a screech for pain, are all sanketa. The gestures of threatening, of giving, or of fearlessness, when applied in visualization, allow the subject to feel protected and blessed, not just to represent specific concepts. Gestures evoke feelings directly, mirroring the cognitive states of the subject displaying these gestures. Just as with facial gestures, hand gestures are comprehended. For example, someone calling, stopping, or showing the middle finger. Emotions and actions reciprocate the gestures without needing propositional attitudes to decipher them. If concepts mediate our reaction, they are more basic than semantic. In essence, there is no categorical difference between gestures and verbal expression, only that the latter gains complexity and propositional structure. Feelings and emotional states can function as gestures, suggesting physical and mental conditions. Tantric discourse on sanketa includes every mode of representation, whether it is presenting again, reproducing early states of being, mirroring, copying, or simulating these modes. The modes of representation in mimetic, iconic, or propositional forms are common to all tantric practices. Each of these modes can be traced in any of the representations by means of the body, speech, and mind. The scope of bodily gestures extends beyond the body and encompasses the ritual objects and the altar. The practitioner acts out, relives, and by means of representation, repeatedly plays out exalted modes of mystical experience. What begins from a sign reference system, such as rice mixed with vermilion powder, a commixture of white seeds and red drops, suggesting the two principles of male and female, does not remain a propositional attitude, but becomes lived and felt, blurring the boundaries of subject and object. When used in rituals, cups and ladles are no longer merely cups and ladles. Butter and sesame seeds are not the offering. The fire is no longer just fire. Even the priest is not a priest, but stands for the benefactor, facilitating the ritual by assigning new meaning to ritual acts, be it gestures displayed, worship of the circle of deities in the chakras, or the performance of fire rituals. Tantric rituals aim to present again modes of experience cultivated by sustained visualization, and not just to place new meaning upon existing signs. The mind in this structure is the fusion of body and speech, and these three constitute the scope of representation. It's in the geometric form, the chakras, the speech, the mantras, and ritual puja that body and speech are meaningful and integral aspects of sign reference relations. Gestures are applied in this ritual context to evoke the elemental form of bliss and consciousness and dissolve dichotomies that determine common sense experience. The objective again is to relive the unitive experiences cultivated through sustained visualization, as the Yogini Hridaya outlines. In quote, when the power of reflexivity wills itself to play in the form of the world, it then becomes the power of action, and it enjoys mood, the world that is its own transformation, by the characteristics of the transcendental bliss and awareness, and it melts dravana in the form of being commingled, and so this attains the name of mudra or gesture. So the etymology given mud and dra for mudra, gesture. Whether by visualizing and internalizing the ritual space by means of mandalas, or enacting and reliving ritualized experience by means of gestures, Tantras meticulously reinforce the idea that we can repeat or present again and again intimate forms of experience through ritualization. These experiences transform the subject's self-image as well as participation in the world. It is in the tantric practice that even copulation becomes a form of gesture. The partner becomes mudra, as the sexual union here enacts divine copulation, the unfolding and enfolding of the cosmos. Thank you so much. I'd like to stop here and ask for questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Sthaneshwar, for a very rich presentation. And thank you, Shravana, for putting the reference to the article also in the chat. So I think everyone's going to want to follow up and so on. So it's very informal occasion. I think because we're on the screen here, if people could use their electronic hands to catch my attention, then I can call on people. I would start it off, Sthaneshwar, I mean, very learned, very, but also very simple in a way about the mudras and the importance of the gesture. I'm wondering about two things. One would be facial expressions. Are facial expressions mudras? You didn't say that they weren't, but I'm not sure if I caught you're saying much about the expression of the face, the tongue, the eyes. How does the face fit in with mudra, or does it?
So some of the earliest accounts for mudra in tantric texts, for example, Vijnana Bhairava, Karankinya Krodhanaya Bhairavya Lelihanaya Khecharya Drishtikalecha Paravapti Prakashati. It's in a Vijnana Bhairava. Like one of the mudra is called Krodhana mudra. So for us to display that gesture, we have to have this really when we are angry, if we have the anger, you know, and when you are sticking tongue out and displaying Lelihana mudra. So there are these facial gestures that I talked mostly, although when I was talking about gestures, a lot of conversation came only about hand gestures, but it's integral to the facial gestures. And that is why mostly in tantric nrityas, like when we have these tantric dance, for example, Bhairava There are some dances you must have observed in Nepal, like there is this Matrika dance, Navadurga dance, Bhairava dance, and then for each of the deity, their mask, particularly if they are using the mask, and they mask, every mask has a completely different expression. So the facial gesture is almost like central to primary to other hand gestures. They are subordinate because whatever the hand gestures are displaying is interpreted or subsumed under a particular facial gesture that particular deity is displaying, or the dancer is copying, mimicking the deity. So yes, the bhava. I briefly touched on sattvika bhava. That is where that like sattvika bhavas will incorporate all the tears or like trembling, and those things come within the facial gestures.
Okay. I have lots of questions. I'll just ask one more and then I'll open it up so everybody get ready to jump in. I'm wondering, I think you make a very good distinction that mudras are not merely extrinsic signs of realities that they're not expressive of, but there's this kind of deep expressiveness that is the body that opens up into the divine and the encounters, the dramatic presentation. So you have a very rich sense, what I, from my tradition, would call sacramental, that there's a rich sacramentality to what you're talking about. But I'm wondering, is it cheating to say that therefore language itself can be redeemed from simply seeing it as kind of the giving over of content of words and concepts to the use of the mouth, the tongue, the teeth, the breath, is a way of kind of elementally reducing language to kind of a mudric practice as well? Or is that going off in the wrong direction?
No, I don't think so. And I don't think there is one answer to because sometimes we have a language and then we are using some gestures in our, already we have a propositional attitude. We already have some determined sentences, what we want to say, and then our facial gestures kind of express that thing which is conveyed, like when I stare at you, like like when couples kind of communicate whether to welcome the guest or what to offer, and then just eye contact means that, and this is a sanketa, the gesture includes that, but there is already a propositional attitude presumed in that context, so each others kind of understand what is being conveyed. But I'm trying to go beneath the development. I'm reading almost in an evolutionary biological terms of how we must have developed first a simple facial or simple, not like complicated hand gestures, but some gestural expression, and then it might have continued through performing rituals, and even before having a completely structured propositional attitude and the type of language we use today. So I'm thinking like in a way of the primacy of gestures actually, but that's not like always the case, because sometimes when we have propositions and we want to convey those propositions by simply eye gesture or something.
Okay, thank you so much. That's wonderful. There's so many things to talk about here. So now the floor is open. Again, anybody from the Harvard side of the country or the San Diego side of the country, put up your electronic hand and we can go forward from here. Who would like to go first? Sunita, good.
Thank you for that very thought-provoking article, Professor Timalsina. I look forward to rereading it because there was a lot there, and I don't know that I understood all of it the way you meant us to. My question is really, I was caught by something that you said, I think in the earlier part, where you're talking about mudras reconfigure reality. They don't just represent, and therefore the experience of this reality will vary depending on the intentionality of the subject that experiences it. So I was just wondering if you could expand a little on that. So if we're talking about mudras as representing some transcendence, then we're are we saying that that transcendence is not similar for everybody? And how does the intentionality play into that?
Let's go from a very simple gesture. Father Clooney would know. I don't know if he does those rituals of "I now pronounce you husband and wife."
Oh yes, yes.
And this single statement by Father Clooney makes you husband and wife. So this is a simple gesture that transforms reality. You were just engaged before. You were not husband and wife, not in the sacred Christian context. But now, by that pronouncement, you are husband and wife. Now there's a grumpy boy, throwing tantrum. And then this is your birthday. We have the cake. Don't you want to come here? And then happy birthday, cheers. And then you do whatever. And then the boy's mood is changed. He's so cherished, he's excited, he comes with the knife. So I'm talking in the ritual context. The objective of a ritual is not to represent something. The objective of a ritual is to transform. I'm not performing a ritual so that I can understand the cosmos. I'm performing a ritual so that I can play a better role in the cosmos, or I want to maybe have, like cows. From Mimamsa perspective, if I am wanting like conquer, my enemies, So this is rituals. I'm using gestures as a subset or within the context of rituals, and rituals are meant not just to represent something, but rather to constitute a new reality. So therefore, gestures, if they are integral to ritual, then gestures play the same thing. And we need to revisit also the philosophy of ritual in this context of how rituals create new meaning. Like a baby, again, going in Professor Clooney's context, is baptized, he becomes a Christian, right? I mean, this is the ritual that creates reality. So we have to think in when we are trying to understand ritual, we have to, is there something new birth coming? And you can't go and ask a biologist if something added there. We are talking about social conventions and constituting our social reality. And that makes, a new, like then when a guy takes, the swears in, that there is the Supreme Court justice, and then we start calling him the president. So on and on, always we are creating reality, and there's always like putting the hand in the Bible or something, it's always rituals there and always gestures there. So we don't need to only read. I'm reading Tantric gesture, but we can, extract this philosophy and apply everywhere in the constructive sense.
Sunita, did you want to follow up or no?
That was very useful. All those images really sort of explain, I think, what you were trying, what you're saying right throughout. But I was just wondering, even in ritual, does intentionality play a role? Or rituals are meant to be transformative, and every baby that's baptized presumably goes to this, I don't know, whether from the baby's point of view or the audience's point of view, they seem to be undergoing a similar experience. But I was wondering with tantric gestures and tantric ritual, how does intentionality, or does it play a part, or am I mistaken? Did I just understand that wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Intentions constitute a new meaning. And for example, performing a death ritual, does it matter to the guy who is dead? Of course, I don't know that part, right? I mean, for the public, it does. So but in the case of Tantra, there are two domains. Tantra is not always private. If you go to Nepal, like you will see that there are many tantric rituals that are publicly performed in the form of dance, and so some of the ritual puja, tantric puja, are publicly performed, and then there is the audience. There is a collaboration of different guthi, like these what to say, family clubs, and they each have like a distinctive role to play. They can't play something else. Like if there are 16 different clubs, and then they each have to play their only designated role in performing these rituals. So like if it's a symphony, for example, you can't have one guy playing in his own way and the other people start playing their own instruments in whatever the way they like. Everything has to be coordinated. And what it does you are looking for a social context, is it brings together all those families in that ritual performance year after year. Like Navadurga, for example, in Bhaktapur, when you have these Navadurga rituals, all the people who were original people living there have their determined role to play. And so it kind of reanimates whenever the rituals were started, maybe 400 years ago, or some rituals like maybe 800 years ago, and then they are enacting those roles that their ancestors played, and from that same family somebody is representing, and still keeping the tie, a kinship, and making it connected. And of course it has some sort of transformative role in a collective sense, but most of the tantric rituals, when we think of Tantra, we think of like private. And then in that case, only that intentionality changes. Suppose if you are worshiping Kali, and then you are kind of trying to do black magic, negative some type of thing, or if you are invoking her for some kind of peaceful thing or liberation. So your intentionality is all that is there, because Kali does not give you whatever she wants, because it's what you want. So the same deity, the same priest, but the intentionality changes everything, the outcome in particular, transformation in particular. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Śaivācārya has been next. So Śaivācārya.
Okay. Sthaneshwar, thank you. This was really, really wonderful. Now you mentioned black magic, and we'll take that offline later, because how you're using the term black magic can be quite debated in the space of Tantra, but I don't want to get into that right now. But you said somewhere, I don't know, at some point you said setting aside magical ritual when you were talking about gestures, and you said setting aside magical ritual in the magical ritual context, some of these gestures, for example, Stambhana in Bhagalamukhi context, for example, again, can have a very intentional, significant, not just a gesture, but also an impact and a result. So how would you, if you would just speak a little bit about how you're differentiating and how you're putting the magical gesture, or rather gestures used in magical rituals, or rituals that consider magic as their framework, how would you differentiate? Like if you can give us an example.
There are maybe I don't know those gestures, but at least as far as I know, there is not really like a particular gesture only used for some of these, like a quote unquote magical, black magical rituals. But what constitutes the same gesture, like if I'm doing kavacha, like Ācārya Dr, I'm doing this Astra mudra. So this is one of the gestures, it's commonly displayed. You cannot have any without a sixfold nyasa, without this gesture every day. But then this very Ācārya Dr, when you do, this is the gesture can be used for destruction, right? So how can you use this gesture every day in your daily ritual for your liberating practices, and the same gesture could be used in those magical purposes, is the mantras. There is no mantra that would not have that particular connotation, like a stambaya, vidveshaya, vidveshaya, mariya, like, you know, those kind of words. And what do these words do? I mean, supposedly they create reality. To say die is to actually kill someone. And let's go beyond tantric culture and talk about our everyday culture. When someone is ill, and then I tell you, oh, my brother is ill, let him die. You don't say that, because, let me send him my healing prayers. I mean, I could very much say, what does it matter? That is ridiculous, because, you know, there are doctors working, but I don't think anybody, except for a jerk, you know, would say, you know, like, why would you bother sending your healing prayers? Every culture, you know, we share that our intentionality matters. Our healing prayers matter. And that is what we are talking about here. It's all about creating force by our pure will, Ichha Shakti. And that is all Tantra is about. In the nutshell, it's about how to purify our will and how to channel our will and how to project our will to create the reality, the intended reality. And these gestures are just kind of sort of that help us focus our will, basically, because, you know, when we are doing like what, you know, whatever, it just kind of, I think, energize a little bit. But at the end, it's about the will. It's not even mantras. Because sometimes a yogi nirupadanam arthajatam prakashayat. It's what is the definition of a yogi is who can create reality by his pure projection, like by his will. Like in the Yoga Sutra, you have read Nirmana Chittani Asmita Matrat, like chapter 4, maybe verse 5 or something like that, you know. So how it's like with his pure ego or with his pure intention, he has the capacity to create reality. And that is the philosophical understanding, at least. So does it happen? Don't ask me that, but I'm just sharing you what are the parameters in which these ideas are discussed.
Thank you. Great. Katie.
First of all, thank you so much, Professor Timalsina. I agree with Sunita, like it was like drinking from a fire hose. So I'm very grateful there's an actual printed document for me to kind of let things ruminate over time. And these conversations have prompted in me, I'm just thinking about this idea of intention and will and the idea of the individual and the community. And so what's the relationship? What happens to this? Like if there's collective imagination and collective minds, you know, completing these gestures with their bodies, with their minds, is there sort of a thinking of what happens to that transformation process? Is there a difference between individual and communal transformation?
That is something to research further, because I have not worked on the social dimension of tantric rituals. But what gives us hope is, like, if you go, for example, to this 64 Yogini Pitha in India, this is a site where at one time, in a very much lived practices did occur in a collective sense. And you go to tantric texts like Pravritte Bhairavi Chakre Sarve Varna Dvijataya. When you enter to Bhairavi Chakra, everybody is a Dvija, twice born. So it's not referring to one individual actually. So it's a collective transformation of everybody enters there is equal, is Bhairava or Bhairavi, is divine. And then, yeah, you go out of your own way and you can assume your worldly roles. But when you are in the Gana Chakra, like there is a Gana Chakra Puja, for example, when you are seated in the Gana Chakra, then you are that deity. And is this only unique to Tantra? let me give you from one a recent ritual in which I participated. Unfortunately, one of my friends' father died, and just last week I had to go to this 12th day memorial service, and in that ritual, I was the substitute father. And I mean it, like I was not dead for that period, but I'm still, I believe, alive. But for that ritual to be completed, somebody had to mediate this realm, which is still here, to that realm, and to play the role of that father, and then actually shift the ritual objects to go to the ancestors. So the ancestors already, like grandfather, great grandfather, they are there to receive. So when I pronounce the mantras, I'm invoking great grandfathers there. And then because the dead person cannot do that, so I am that dead person for that period. The dead person comes back to life through me. So it's like, you can understand either way. But anyway, that is the mediation. And so what is happening there? It's intention. I mean, is there something other than intentionality? I can't see that. But does it have like a private function? It's a pretty much collective social function. And these functions is what keep cultures alive. You know, when we are performing these rituals, whether marriage or death or, you know, whatever, upanayana, for example, you know, then Bhavatumam Bhiksham Dehi, like if you are twice born and then you go from one uncle to another, one aunt to another, you know, and then give me the alms. And in a Brahminical context, I'm saying, as long as you are not begging alms, then you are not twice born. And when you complete that begging, actually just asking for alms, that asking for alms, a gesture of other people protecting you. It doesn't matter whether you come from a very rich family or very poor family. When you enter the school, every child is the same. Every child just asks for support from all other people, is dependent, and it is a moral obligation for the community to support for his education. That is what you get from that ritual. And then everybody who comes to give blessing is confirming that, yeah, I will support for your school education. I mean, I'm talking in the traditional sense, whether it applies the same meaning today or not, but it is performed like a drama today, but that is what it means. So all these rituals have that transformative social role. And we don't need to distinguish tantric ritual as a completely separate type from other everyday rituals.
Great, thank you. Mara is next.
Thank you for your talk. It was very interesting. And in your article, one of the things that I found particularly intriguing was your discussion on Abhinavagupta and dance and doing a lingam as mimicry. But I was wondering, in like outside of a dance context, within the theological world of Kashmir Shaivism, how does like a Shiva lingam mudra tie into rituality and philosophy, if you can speak to that?
First of all, one term on mimicking. This amazing book, Pashupata Sutra. I do not know to what extent it is available in other than Sanskrit, Kaundinya's commentary, because I'm talking in, because it's predates like 500 years from whatever the Abhinava, or we can find of those later conversations on drama, but it's in a purely religious context of simply mimicking the deity and just pretending, like wearing ashes and then the whole gestures and this is a whole drama. And why are you performing this? You are not. But then this mimicking is what starts the journey, and it cultivates. And for the Shiva Linga, of course, whether you want to understand as just a phallic representation, or whether, for example, if you go to Nepal, we have this Pashupati. I'm sorry, they don't let you go, but there are other Pashupati type Shiva Lingas with the face, 4 different faces. So that I think Pashupati Linga or Mukha Linga start appearing since like 2nd century onward. So it's pretty historical actually. And so they are not meant for at least 2000 years to just be simply a phallus, but they are meant to be the face of different deities to whatever number they are integrated with, like 5 faces or only 1 face, or 3 murti, like 3 faces. Is just always an integration. Again, is that a linga? That linga is a sign. Is that a phallus? So how do you want to understand it? It all boils down to the viewer. How do the viewers, how do the practitioners, the worshippers understand it? And because that is what changes the entire paradigm right there, right then.
Mara, did you want to follow up, or is that okay?
So if in person or virtual, and I apologize if I'm not getting this out correctly, I'm like processing as I ask, but if one is to do like a Shivalingam mantra in their own personal ritual practice, does it have some relation to like an Ishtalinga, like having, I don't know how to fix, does that make sense? I'm stumbling over my...
Yeah, just if depending on, because the Śaivācārya practices are manifold. In Nepal, in particularly, we have the Pashupata practices alive today, integrated with Shambhava practices. These are nitty-gritty tantric stuffs coming later. But your own, there are in 4 different ways the linga sthapana is conceived. Swayambhu, like in the Muladhara, like internally, whatever is built in within your body. And then you have the bana, like the external physical linga. And then you have Mercury made type lingas you are using. And then sometimes you can have Ishtar. Generally in South India, this became more popular about hanging like a tiny, I think I have one around here. Let me show you. Fortunately, I didn't have to look too far. So you have these type of small lingams. We can be, like either hanging here or keeping in pocket. It's your personal connection to Lord Shiva. This symbol is it started from all the Nayanar saints. They started the movement of keeping, and Veerashaivas in particular do adopt these. So it's manifold. Maybe if we are not clear today, we can continue this conversation, because I love this study, and I'm happy to, always never feel like I chat on Facebook with Professor Frank Clooney can like mark as like a, bad boy doing Facebooking, but my kids say it's like grow up, but I'm not gonna, because all of my friends are connected through Facebook. So you can always drop a line or email me, and I'm always available for any conversation within these areas of common interest.
No, Sthaneshwar, I mean, Tantra is esoteric, but Facebook is far more esoteric for me. So I can't do Facebook. So I miss all of that. Sorry about that.
Good for you. You get more time to do your reading and writing.
Probably. So Vandan, please.
I just had a small question. So I was wondering, in the sense of Paininiya Sutra, Nama Swasti Swaha Alam Vashad Yogacha, and like those words, this seem to have roots in many places. As we started here, it seemed like they found their roots in the Tantra. But I was just reading I was just seeing the Brahma Sutras, and there is a sutra in the 3rd Adhyaya that says that these words, like all these mudrās and tantric words, they are apurva in Vedanta. So they're not seen in Vedanta before. So Vedanta has them, like Vedanta has found them new. So I was just wondering that how are they connected? Because even in Swaminarayan Mahapuja, we have Vastraya Phat, and Nama, Swasti, Swaha, all of those. So I was just wondering, how are they connected?
It's kind of broad, and I'm also a bit lost, not trying to evade the question, but let me just share something unrefined, uncooked thought of what I have. These namaha, like for example, if you go to the, I'm from the Shukla Yajurveda branch, and we have and Krishna has the same thing for the Rudram. Namaste Rudram Annava Uto Ta Ikhave Namaha Bahubhya Mutate Namaha. So you have, this is the first mantra of the Rudradhyaya. So Namaste, so this Namaha comes in the mantric context. And we don't need Panini for that. Panini comes much later in that matter. But this Swaha, Swadha, all are for different purposes. Swadha is for Pitri. Like for when we do Swadha, that is, we are making libation to the dead people. When we are Swaha, then we do not say Swaha for the Pitri, we do for the Devas. You do not say Swadha for the Devas, because that will be, I think I might try that. That could be pretty annoying. Indraya Swadha would mean like I offer this libation to dead Indra. That would be horrific. I don't think he would be very happy. So, the whole meaning is changed by I'm expressing the same honor by making all the offerings. I just simply change the word that we use for either the gods in the heaven or the ancestors in the ancestors realm, and then by switching that word could mean completely different. So therefore, yes, these words are used, and why Swaminarayan uses, it's just like a pan-Indian context, like our Swamiji would say, we use that in, Vedanta temple too. It's just kind of following the rubric. It's just that when you have this basic rubric, when was the rubric made? I don't know. It's like most of these are as ancient as when Sautramani or some of these, you may have to read Fritzstal for that. He has done extensive research on ritual, on meaning, also on mudrās. So I didn't even mention his name today, but Fritzstal is like it needs a lifelong reading.
Yeah, so much. So Swami, San Diego was mentioned. Did you want to jump in and react from the Vedanta perspective?
Well, I also just have a question. Sometimes, Dr. Timalsina, we've seen like photographs of these saints who get into these meditative states. And then you see their bodies in different sort of postures, their hands in different mudrās. So when you see this, do these mudrās that they're putting in these deep meditative states, are they suggestive of different states of consciousness?
When we are interpreting that, therefore, we need always like almost like a Second World War type or a spies decoder. If you lack the decoder and the gestures mean nothing. So therefore, book reading becomes essential. These days, people want to go study other culture, but not the books, that's an anti-textual kind of movement. But when we say you have to read the books to understand the gestures, you do. Otherwise, like some of the gestures, fortunately, there is no middle finger gesture in Tantra. Just imagine if we had a deity displaying that and then imported in America, it would be so funny, right? I mean, and then that is why we have to save also the cultures from misappropriation and misunderstanding. And therefore, we need to actually consult those texts, or if they say I'm displaying this gesture by this. In some gestures, it may not be necessary, but in many other, particularly tantric gestures, because they have this most refined, complex system of hand gestures. That is why I was talking mostly of tantric gestures, and we have to go to the context for that.
If I could ask a second question here, I'm thinking, Sthaneshwar, so I've been involved with ritualizing for 40 years and more and so on like that. And we always get drummed into us in seminary about the deep meaning of every gesture and every word and every element and so on like that. And then over the years, we become sloppy and, you know, going through the routine, merely doing, acting it out, and you leave things out, you skip this, you skip that, and so on like that. Whenever I hear about tantric practice, it always seems to be the ideal practitioner who's doing this with incredible intensity and sincerity of heart, and very much like yourself, aware of every possible deeper meaning. Is there not, I'm not talking about left-handed, right-handed or anything, but sort of humdrum everyday tantric practice, puja, where people become routine and they kind of go through the motions without the depth that you're talking about? Is that must be a human factor? Is that happening?
Absolutely. It tends to be more and more sloppy, and we get to be more and more tired or not wanting to do.
Yeah.
And like, for example, mantra jap, for example, let me find the, like I found these beads right now. So I'm using these beads for counting, for example. You know, in different cultures, we use beads for counting. So Tantra says, don't use the beads now because you are being sloppy. You start using the alphabets, like from A to Ksha and Ksha to A, you go 50, 50, 100, and Ācārya Tapa Yasa 8 added 108. So now it's very difficult to be sloppy now because A and then the mantra, A and then the mantra. But then when it gets so used to, after practicing for a year or two, and then you can start having your own mental journey to, you know, India and Nepal, and then it still keeps on going. And then they add 3 syllables now instead of just A. Now Ācārya. Now they, I mean, if somebody wants to perform with its intensity, they keep adding these additional elements to make it more and more complex, so that the refined subject, because when I want to do Rudram, I don't need to use my mind, you know, like, because I've read this text maybe like 10,000 times, and I can do all and then be sleeping, you know. So, but then how do we make this as active? Is therefore then they would assign, like, if I'm chanting this particular mantra, then I'm supposed to offer that particular object, and then I need to be in tracking these things of whether when I'm reading these 16, for example, initial mantras, then am I offering 16 different objects, or am I being sloppy and mixing that? Exactly. So the texts and the teachers try to make it as exact and as meticulous, but the practitioners always love to be sloppy. And one of the good things about Tantra is, like, if someone really wants to practice, and then we scare them off that if you go sloppy, and then so many negative things can happen, and, you know, and then you might have some psychological problems, and people start imagining if it is harming me or something, and they run away. So what the Tantras do is, rather than making it more broadly applicable so people can be sloppy and still do, we like to scare them off so that they just, if they are feeling sloppy, they can leave it. Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I think, I'm thinking again of Christian context about whether or not a smaller and smaller group of true practitioners who are truly spiritual and truly focused is better, or have more and more people involved, even if they're doing it imperfectly and sloppily and so on. And there's always a tension there between everybody's welcome and no, it's only a few people who can ever do these things. And so it's a tension that sounds like similar, but it seems like for Tantrikas maybe going more toward the expert practitioner who does it right, rather than saying this is common to some other people and so on. Yeah, no, thank you. Sure. Like when these, like for example, in Nepal, it is quite common for everybody to have one level initiation, and they are not even called tantric or anything. Like when you get married, when you get Upanayana, then you have the Veda mantra. When you get married, then you have one Ishtadeva mantra. which is basically tantric practice, but without calling it a tantric practice. So everybody is, in a very plain, simple sense, practicing something, but then when one wants to go for more intensity, then that is when he's required to pass through repeated tests. And even then, people tend to do all kinds of bunch of stupid things, and and sometimes when there are these even like scary things involved, like living in a cremation ground kind of things involved, and people might have their nervous breakdown too, because when you face death, for example, and so of course they need to give a lot of precaution for to prepare for those unforeseen consequences.
Yeah, thank you. So we've been going an hour and a half. Anyone would like to have a last question, or if you've asked a question already, you can ask another one or comment. Anybody else want to jump in?
Sort of on this same thread, and the idea of, the community, it sounds like kind of holding you accountable in a way of like telling you what things to do so you don't become sloppy, and how to, practice the right way. I wonder, is there any sort of accountability or pressure or responsibility to perform certain gestures and enact certain transformations for the betterment of the whole world?
There are, of course, Shanti or Paustika karma in Tantra, performed for peace and prosperity. And so these type of rituals are performed more commonly, like collectively, rather than privately. So if I'm doing some marana, which I don't do, but like some killing intentional, that like magic ritual, then most likely this is going to be very private, but not always, because in classical times, kings, before invading other kings, would have these mantrikas to perform those type of rituals to kill the other king. And when they are actually in the battlefield really trying to kill, their mantrikas are collectively gathered, spelling mantras, and then cursing, like sending all those kind of mantric whatever thing, creating. So, but anyway, you are asking in the peaceful context. Yes, the social context makes a difference in the gesture, and there are like so many mudras, if we are going back to the very context of the mudras, that would be displayed for peaceful purposes that would not be applicable in other wrathful purposes. I would not say for destructive purposes, but wrathful deities, Chandali, these deities would display more wrathful gestures, and they do the consumption of our attachment with the external reality more quickly. That is the tantric understanding, because tantric deities are not there to destroy anybody. They are there to destroy our own delusions and ignorance and our own negativity very quickly. But then their gestures are going to be more ferocious, more fiery.
Thank you. Well, if there's no one else who wants to jump in, I think our last act is first to remind you that on the 24th of February, Jack Hawley from Columbia, Barnard will come up and talk about Vrindavan and what's going on there today. And I think the tensions there between preserving the holy spot and overpopulation and so on. So that'll be fascinating. But our very last thing is to thank Sthaneshwar for a wonderful talk and for making us think of so many things. Thank you so much. And normally now we'd say, let's go eat the samosas and have a glass of wine and then go off to dinner. So whenever you're coming to Sthaneshwar to Boston, meet your brother and so on, we will take you out to dinner, and it'll be our pleasure and our honor to thank you here also.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Means a lot.
Great. Thanks everyone for coming and being here with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.